Welcome back to Retrieving Sanity, a podcast where we dive into the depths of mental health one laugh at a time. I'm your host Keegan, and I'm here to talk about everything from anxiety and depression to self-care and finding joy in the everyday. Because, let's face it, life can suck, but we don't have to navigate it alone. Retrieving Sanity is a partner with Podcast for Prevention, an initiative from Start Day 1 that aims to prevent suicide and promote mental health awareness. Together, we're working to break the stigma and create a more supportive community. So, grab a cup of coffee, sit back, relax, and let's retrieve our sanity together. Today, we have a very special guest, and her name is Jackie Baxter. How are you doing today?
Hi there. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I'm super happy that you're here. It sounds like you've got an amazing story to share with us, and by all means, I'm so glad I got your name right this time. For those of you who don't know, I already messed up her name twice. So, Jackie, if you could, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background like? What do you do? What kind of got you into doing what you do, because everyone's story is a little bit different. So what's yours like?
Sure. So I'm thinking, how far back do I go? Because I think what I've kind of learned on this whole journey is that, we think, oh, this journey lasted 3 years, but actually it didn't at all. It started way back, possibly before I can even remember. But we probably don't have time for that. About 5 years ago now, I was living, super busy, active. I was doing everything. I was killing it. Or I thought I was killing it. I was working in schools, teaching music, dashing around doing all of that. I was working freelance, doing all sorts of other stuff too. And I was always super active as well. So I love running, I love cycling, I love climbing mountains, I love camping. Basically outdoors and active. I'm on it. Love it. And never ever really stopped, which I always thought was a good thing. I was always on the go. I was doing everything. Someone had a problem, I'm your person. I will say yes to everything, and I always thought this was a good thing to be. And everything kind of came crashing down in March 2020. Everything kind of came crashing down in March 2020 for everybody. But for me, I got sick with what turned out to be COVID and didn't get better. So that kind of sucked. And yeah, sort of 3 and a bit years later. So it took me about, I think it was 3 years, 3 months to sort of fully recover from that. And we can probably dive more into that at some point. But what I decided that I wanted to do was something that really served me. And I think part of the journey was really sort of discovering who I actually wanted to be rather than where I'd kind of fallen into. And I think it's really easy to look back on, a life beforehand and think, well, I was asking for it. And sort of was on some level, but I wasn't deliberately asking for it. I was living what I thought was the right life. And I sort of discovered over this experience that actually I didn't want to be doing all of those things, that some of the personality traits and things that I thought were good were actually really harmful, like people pleasing and perfectionism and this kind of push that society tells us that we should be doing. If you stop and rest or take a day off or any of these things, we're told that we're lazy. And, I believed all of this. I 100% believed all of this. I, taught it from childhood. And I'd taken it through into my adult life to the point where I put myself in a position where I was very vulnerable to what eventually took me out. And honestly, I think if it hadn't have been that, it would have been something else that had taken me out. It just happened to be that was the kind of, grenade that blew my life apart, I suppose. So yeah, that all happened, and I'm now working as a breathing instructor and a coach, and I'm helping people who are still on that kind of recovery journey to be who I needed when I was ill. there was no information out there. There was nothing, or nothing that was really helpful. And this narrative was that, oh, long COVID, that's a bit like ME, and you don't recover from that. Basically, this is a life sentence. You are never going to get better. The best you can possibly hope for is that it might not be too awful. And that's just not true. And it's so harmful that people are told that. So yeah, I'm all about the can rather than the can't. And, I think that's a really important message to get out there.
Awesome. Well, I'm super sorry that you got really sick, because 3 years plus sounds like a terrible time with COVID. And
It wasn't a lot of fun.
no, I can imagine not. I think I had COVID like right at the beginning. The only problem was where I was living. Whenever I called in to try to get a test, they had like 12 of them, so I went really sick for a good while, and then I got better, but never really knew. But I did hear about long COVID, and I didn't really know too much about long COVID itself, so this is an interesting opportunity for myself and the audience, because I mean, we get to hear what recovery is like for long COVID, and we get to hear the tools that you used for it and that you help teach. And so I also remember one saying, it's kind of like either you need to take a break, or your body will take one for you, and it's not going to be at a convenient time. And I think that society is really bad about the hustle and bustle and just always going. So, and then that coupled with COVID, and just that was a crippling disease for many people. So how did that affect you and your mindset? Because to me, I love being active, so I have problems physically that will limit me in the future, which sucks. So what did COVID do for you in that regard? And are these some of the tools that you also use to get out of that mindset?
Yeah, so I think, long COVID, some people say long COVID is a really unhelpful term because it's this massive umbrella term. But it's what we have, and I'm not going to get into that. For most people with long COVID, it is, in my opinion, nervous system driven. So I think that's the reason why a lot of people, I'm not going to say 100% because nothing is absolute, but most people beforehand may have had big stressors. So, maybe something big that happened just before they got unwell, or maybe sort of chronic stress, or maybe both for some people. And it's kind of looking back through that history is really interesting for me on my own journey, kind of understanding, oh, so that all added up, plus the fact that I was super stressed because I was working too much and doing too much, made my nervous system very, very vulnerable, to the point when, it was kind of, the match to the gasoline, kind of thing. So for me, I got sick, and I probably got it at work because I was working in a school, and we weren't really counting cases until, well, no one was really testing, I think, at the start. So I don't think nobody realized really, because we weren't being told how many cases there actually were. And then when everything did lock down, well, I was already sick by then, so I didn't really notice the difference, to be honest. Whereas everyone else really, did notice, weren't able to go outside, weren't able to do whatever. I was already in my bed sick by that point. I did lockdown before it was cool. So I was really sick for like about a week. To the point my partner actually called the paramedics. He was that worried about me, and he's the sort of person that's like, oh, you'll be fine, so for him to do that, like, that was that was quite epic. But they were like, you're okay, you're not dying, we're not taking you to hospital. I think the threshold for hospital admissions at that point was pretty high, but after about a week or so, like I was doing better. I was doing better to the point where I thought, I'll do something. So I think I went for a walk or something. And then that crashed me for weeks. So I was sort of back in my bed for, I think, several weeks after that. And then I was able to sort of potter around the house for a couple of weeks after that. And then I was feeling quite a lot better. So I got some advice that turned out to be maybe based on sort of best intentions, but certainly wasn't the right thing for me, which was, oh yeah, just get back out there and do stuff. So I thought, perfect. Well, that's been a really horrible 6 weeks, but that's in the past now, we're all good. So I went for a walk and I felt really tired, but I thought, well, I haven't done anything for 6 weeks. So that's okay. So I went for another walk. I got on my bike. I started doing things and I just started kind of pushing myself because that was what I'd always done. Basically, if there was a problem, you push through it. We have this saying, they put it on tea towels that says keep calm and carry on in the UK. And, it's that kind of like British stiff upper lip. You don't say anything. You don't, all of that sort of rubbish. And I think that was kind of what I did. I was like, right, well, whatever, keep going. And to be fair, things did seem to be getting better. I was able to cycle further. I was able to walk further. I can't remember if I'd tried running or not. I can't remember. But I was doing much, much better. And I thought, well, this has been awful. But 3 months later, I'm sort of on the way to being myself again. And then it was shortly after that where I just hit a wall. So I totally crashed, and the fatigue was just crushing. I think for anyone who hasn't experienced sort of true fatigue, a lot of people, possibly one of the most hurtful things you can say to somebody with long COVID or with ME/CFS is, oh yeah, I get a bit tired too. And like people were saying that to me. It was like, just take a nap, take a day off. And it wasn't that sort of tiredness. And it's really hard to describe what that feels like if you haven't experienced it yourself. But it's that, I don't know, like there was one morning about three years in, I think, maybe a bit less than that. And my partner had gone out and got absolutely hammered the night before. And, he wasn't feeling spectacular in the morning, let's say. And it was the first morning in about 3 years that I had woken up feeling better than him. So it's the kind of thing where you could sleep for years and still not feel refreshed. So that was horrendous. Like I was really struggling to breathe. My heart rate was spiking all over the place. My body was just not working. It wasn't functioning. I couldn't regulate temperature. My digestion was a bit weird some of the time. I was really sensitive to light and sound and motion as well. If I was in the car, I would get car sick. And I used to be able to read for hours and hours and hours in the back seat of a car. So this was totally new. So it was, there were so many different symptoms and they popped up and then they went away for a bit and then they came back and then new ones would come on. And just when you sort of thought you'd got rid of maybe something and something was getting better, you'd crash again. So it was this kind of up and down kind of trajectory that was so difficult. And I think, people with things like long COVID and ME don't talk about mental health enough. And, I think the reason is because so many people have been gaslit by doctors, by employers, by family members, by the world. Oh, you're just anxious. It's just anxiety. You just need to sort out your anxiety. And it's not just anxiety. And to be fair, as someone who's experienced anxiety, there's no just about anxiety anyway. Anxiety can be pretty crippling. But, I think so many people with these sorts of illnesses have spent so many years going to their doctor and explaining all these symptoms. And their doctors said, I don't know, or, try to force some diagnosis on them that they don't understand. And often it is mental health related. So they've said, oh, it's just anxiety. Oh, you're just depressed. And I think the problem is that many of these people are anxious, possibly are depressed, because they don't have their lives. You know, they don't have any autonomy over their bodies. They don't know if they're ever going to get better. They haven't got anything that helps. You know, they're probably struggling financially because they can't work, some of them. So it's like all of this stuff. So of course they're anxious. Of course they're depressed, but they're not just anxious and not just depressed. And I think the problem is that people are so worried about being labelled as anxious or depressed, you know, just in sort of hefty quotation marks, that they don't talk about this because they're so worried about being labelled as that they don't talk about genuine mental health problems that they do probably have on top of the physical health problems that they have. So they've got all these untreated mental health stuff going around, and untreated mental health, I don't think I need to tell you that is bad. You know, like untreated mental health is as bad as untreated physical health. You know, they go together so much, don't they? And I think, you know, certainly my experience, you know, it was the up and down that was so difficult. You know, it was like you'd be feeling absolutely awful. You know, I spent so much time just crying on the sofa because I just couldn't do anything. I didn't know what to do. I just felt absolutely dreadful. But then you'd start feeling a little bit better. You know, you'd have a week where you could do a bit of stuff, and it was so hard not to do all the things. But you also knew, you know, after a while, it was like, well, a good week's always going to be followed by a bad week. And then you get into that kind of thing where you're like, well, I don't want to enjoy the good days because I know what's going to come afterwards. And then you can sort of self-perpetuate as well, can't you? Because you can be like, oh, a bad day's coming, and hey, a bad day comes. So it's these kind of ups and downs where you almost don't want to believe that maybe things are going your way, because you know how utterly, utterly devastating it's going to be when you hit that crash and, oh, no, it's not happening. I'm back down here again. And, you know, I think it's just so difficult. It's so crippling mentally to have to deal with those ups and downs and to keep continually picking yourself up time after time after time. And each time you start to feel a little bit better, it's like, well, I don't want to believe this, because last time I believed it and look what happened, and that hurt just too damn bad. So, you know, it's like, how do you balance that out with this hope and belief in recovery, but also that acceptance of the now? And it is so difficult. And I think I've just gone off on a bit of a rant, and I can't actually remember what you asked me.
No, that is totally fine. You can rant all you want here. It is a safe and honest space for all. But no, that is great, because you did answer the question, and it does sound like long COVID can, and other illnesses can have impacts, or actually rather they can have a very similar journey with the mental health aspect, as in having the long COVID where you have a good week it's kind of like having BPD or bipolar, where you're having good days, and then next thing you know, you hit your other phase, and it's like, oh, well, there goes that. And you can sit there and you can, well, what I can do with mine is I can think that it's going to be a bad day, and it's not really a bad day, but something happens and I turn it into a bad day. And then there are days where I can't get myself out of a funk, and the littlest things can either trigger me, or I can just sit there, and if the worst of it, I can just not want to get out of bed, you know, but at the same time, my body doesn't want me to not sleep for like 4 hours or more, you know. So with long COVID and all of that, it has its own struggles that in recovery. Long COVID recovery sounds a lot like recovery from substance abuse as well, with having those struggles of being gaslit and not necessarily having people believe in you, you know, because that's a big one too. But what are some of the things that you did to really start getting out of your funk? Because sure, you had those weeks where you felt like you could go do everything, and I would have been in the same boat. In fact, I do the same thing. Whenever I hit a manic phase, there's times where it's like I gotta pump the brakes because I know it's not going to be that good if I keep going. But they're like, what? Just what was it like for you? What kind of got you going?
Yeah, I think the problem to start with was that I tried what I had always done, which was to push myself, to try to exercise, to keep on going. And surely my body will catch up if I keep pushing it, because like I'd always got away with that before. So, why change the channel? So I tried the wrong things. Or certainly I tried the wrong things in the wrong way. And I think, movement and exercise is something that people talk about a lot, because a lot of people with long COVID have exercise intolerance, post-exertional malaise. So you do a thing and then it kicks you up the bum like 24 hours, 48 hours later. So you don't always have a sense of, well, maybe I feel okay doing this thing now, but there's also that kind of self-perpetuation where you're like, oh, I did a thing, therefore I'm going to feel terrible tomorrow. So we can kind of, do that. But also, sometimes it's not that at all. It's that your body's like, oh, that thing you did 3 days ago. Ha, gotcha, kind of thing. So it's very difficult to kind of read that. And, so some of the things that I was doing, maybe they did feel okay in the moment. I mean, they often didn't, and I was just pushing through. But there were plenty of times where maybe I didn't feel too bad doing it. But yeah, the next day or 2 days later, I just was crashed out on the couch again. So I think the problem to start with was that I was trying things that weren't working, but also that I didn't really know what to do. So I was just defaulting, basically. I was defaulting to what I'd always done. And, people were talking about reducing your activity. And I thought, okay, well, I can do that. Instead of cycling like 60K, I'll, do half that. And, I think it's difficult because everyone's different. But I was trying to, I thought I was doing less, but I wasn't doing less enough. I was doing nowhere near less enough. And as someone who, the outdoors and exercise was something that was so important to me, that I thought, well, it can't be doing me harm because exercise is good. We're always told this, exercise more, exercise is good. And, it is good, but you got to do it in the right way for you. And, for someone with long COVID, that exercise might be rolling over in bed, or it might be climbing your stairs. It might be something very, very, very small, certainly to start with, in order to get everything, a little bit more stable. And then maybe you can start to think about, increasing that activity, but very, very carefully. And I think one of the most important things for me was that I started to understand what was going on. So I started to understand that we had a nervous system and what it did and all the different states and how to start recognizing them in my own body. So if I was feeling totally shut down, then movement was not the right thing for me. Actually, in that situation, it's the couch. Just go sit on the couch, lie on the couch, curl up. Don't try to do. Whereas, maybe if I was feeling activated, maybe something very gentle actually would be helpful. And if I was in the nice, happy green zone that I was like literally never in, then, maybe that's the time to do stuff. So it's starting to really understand what that looked like and what that looked like for me. And I think the first thing that really helped me was breathing. And this is something that we all take for granted. Like most people do not really notice their breathing. Or maybe they notice their breathing if they're running up a hill and they're like, oh my goodness, my breath feels like it's jumping out of my throat kind of thing. But most people don't really pay that much attention to their breath until it really shouts at you. Like when you're getting extremely out of breath. And I think for me, I was getting extremely out of breath from like sitting up. So that kind of like, I've just run out of a hill kind of, feeling that you get. Like I was getting that from like sitting up, from going to the bathroom. I remember like we were in a flat, and my bedroom was literally next door to the bathroom. And I remember like it taking me about 25 minutes for my heart rate to sort of get back down to something resembling normal, having got up and used the bathroom. And it wasn't always like that, but it was like that quite a lot of the time. So the breathing for me, it was starting to understand, I mean, I could geek out about breath all night, and I'm so happy to do that. But, it was kind of understanding that most of us breathe fundamentally wrong. I didn't even think that there was a way to breathe wrong. Breathing is an absolute. You either do or you don't. And if you don't, then that's not great. But, it was understanding that actually there is a wrong way to breathe. And that there is, everyone can work on their breath, can improve their breath, and that will make them healthier. And it's amazing the deeper you dive into it. So it was partly like retraining my breath so I was breathing correctly, and then also using other breathing exercises to help me when I really, when things did spike, and getting that under control was so helpful for me. And that was why I decided that I was going to retrain as a breathing instructor, and that I was going to do this, because not enough people know the world needs more breathing instructors, and it particularly needs more breathing instructors who understand long COVID, because we're not regular people with long COVID. You can't go in with a kind of, oh, I know how to breathe. I'm going to do breathing exercises like a regular person. And, you can't do that, because some of these people are bedbound, are not able to breathe. Their breathing rate is sky high, and their nervous systems are so utterly dysfunctional that if you try to sort of treat them like regular, people, that actually it makes them worse. So that's what I do now. I work with these people, and it's amazing. If we think about, we breathe something like 25,000 breaths a day. And if we are breathing dysfunctionally, so not effectively, not efficiently, not in a way that serves us, with every breath we breathe, all 25,000 of them, we are triggering our nervous system, ding, 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 with every single breath. Whereas if we're breathing functionally, then not that we don't get stressed, because life is stressful, but we are coming from this basis of regulation. So when we do get stressed, we're able to come back down again. And, understanding that a functional nervous system doesn't stay in the green zone all the time. A functional nervous system surfs those waves. It's able to flip between states. If we were always in our rest and digest, always in the green zone, we would never do anything. It would be so boring. So we have to be able to move about when required. But the problem is, I was stuck in that kind of chronic fight flight probably before I got sick. So then when I did, the body sort of blew up into this massive kind of sort of dumpster fire. And then the trip switch went. And I went into this kind of shutdown state, so understanding the breath was amazing. And then that just opened out so many more possibilities, because it got things a little bit under control. I think to start with, there was just everything, I woke up one day and had 50 things wrong with me. And I didn't. I had one thing wrong with me. But, it looked like 50 different things. And the breath really allowed me to get things kind of a bit more under control. And, I could sort of see the wood for the trees. So then that opened out things like actually being able to properly rest. So yoga nidra was amazing, because you just lie down, you put your headphones on, and you don't actually do anything. And it helps you to shut your brain down. And, I don't know if I have ADHD, but my brain definitely tends in that sort of direction. It's very, very busy. Yeah. And again, I always thought this was a good thing. I thought it was kind of normal. And I realized that my brain isn't like other people's. And my brain's amazing. My brain is such a cool brain. It does all this stuff. It's so creative. It thinks of things. It's ideas. It's all of this stuff. And I love that about it. but it's very difficult to switch off. And, you know, with sort of long COVID and MECFS, we talk about like different types of exertion, and all of them have this impact on us. And when you have to manage your energy very, very carefully, you start to understand that, you know, physical exertion is kind of obvious because you're moving.
Yeah.
You know, you go for a walk, you climb your stairs, you go to the kitchen to get a cup of tea. You know, that's physical exertion. So you can shut that down by just stopping. You know, so in some ways it's not easy to do, but it's easier to understand. Whereas with things like cognitive exertion, you know, reading an email, reading a book, you know, that's cognitive exertion, but so is your brain braining. So when your brain is braining and you're thinking, and for me, the less I did physically, the more the brain started really going into overdrive. That was exhausting. And yet it was something that I couldn't shut down. So things like the yoga nidra and that proper deep rest was something that was really, really helpful to me. But I struggled to access that when my breath was still, you know, really up and down and kind of, you know, out of control. So the breath kind of opened up this kind of world of yoga nidra, which was amazing. And that helped me to really properly rest. You know, the other things like exertion, emotional, that one's quite difficult because you can't plan that one. You know, you can sort of plan physical, you can sort of plan cognitive, but you don't know when something bad is going to happen that affects you emotionally, or when your partner is going to pick a fight with you, or even say something that he was trying to say nicely and that I took the wrong way. You know, because when we're very sort of in this kind of fight flight response, we are more reactive to stuff. So he might think that he was being very sensitive, but he wasn't. I mean, he's also a man, but you know, it was also that just I, you know, was very reactive when I was in that particular state. So they were quite difficult. You know, people talk about their social battery. You know, and I'm starting to realize that actually my social battery is quite small. I do enjoy spending time with people, but not in big groups. And I've always known that about myself. I just haven't known that I've known. You know, I was never a pub person. I only went there because other people did. And I'm now realizing that actually I really enjoy spending time with people. I have wonderful relationships with quite a lot of people. But small groups or one-on-ones is what works for me. And when you have something like long COVID, you know, spending time with anyone is exhausting, but particularly spending time with more people or where there's background noise or things like that, because we just can't, you know, it's tiring to process that. So there's so many different things. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent. So the yoga nidra was amazing. And then the third big thing that really helped me was the cold water swimming. And I'm going to just caveat this. If anyone's listening and they want to try it, lots of people have tried cold water and said it made them worse. And I think the reason it worked for me was because I was about 2 years in when I started it and things had stabilized a bit. So I'd worked on my breathing, I'd worked on my yoga nidra, I'd done, you know, other bits and pieces and stuff as well, and things were a bit more stable. So I think that was one reason why it worked really well for me. And also I was very careful. I stayed in hardly any time to start with. So I think the two main mistakes that people make is that they try it too soon before things have stabilized, and then they stay in for too long because they think, well, I've driven to the beach, so therefore I have to make it worth it and stay in for however long. Whereas actually you get your main benefits after about 90 seconds. You do not need to stay in longer than that. So I was literally in, I got in the water, stood there for, 30 seconds, and I got out. So I was very, very careful about it. But, you know, I'm super lucky. We have Loch Ness just down the road. So, you know, I have access to water very, very close. And, you know, I just started going in, I think it was about end of April, beginning of May. So the temperatures were starting to warm up a little bit. The water was still cold, but it wasn't like January. You know, and I just started going in, you know, a couple of times, 2 or 3 times a week, just for like a couple of minutes. And it sort of sounds a bit over dramatic to say it gave me my life back, but it kind of did. I felt like when I got in that water, once I'd got out and put my clothes back on and warmed up, it was like I'd been plugged into a socket. And, I just felt like I had energy, and it didn't last, or it certainly didn't to start with. But like for a bit, maybe an hour, a couple hours afterwards, I felt so much better. And then I kept doing it. And over time, I felt better for longer. So it was absolutely amazing. And I think, a lot of people talk about cold water swimming for mental health as well, because it gets you outside. Maybe you're doing it with people. And I found that as well. Like, I'm an outdoors person and I couldn't go up the mountains, but I could get into the water and look at them. It felt like a different kind of take on the same thing. It was something my partner and I could do together. He doesn't swim as much as I do, but he would get in some of the time, or he'd certainly stand on the bank with my towel for me, and sort of hand me clothes afterwards as I was kind of like, I'm cold. But there's also a local swimming group, and I think, coming back to your first question about mindset, I think, you get sick and your life gets turned on its head, and you can't do the things that you could do before. You can't, maybe if exercise was a part of your life, you don't see the people that you did exercise with because you did exercise with them, and you can't do exercise. You don't see your work colleagues because you're not working, or maybe you are working from home, so you're not seeing anybody. You feel very cut off. You're not socializing because your social battery is like zero. And people lose touch after a while. Some people will say, hey, how are you doing? And that's a difficult question to answer, because do you want the kind of like, not great, but, or do you want details? Because I've got 3 pages, and so people stop asking, or they say the wrong things, and then you don't want to hear from them anyway. So it's very, very difficult. And then you find your tribe. You find other people who have something in common with you. So, other people with long COVID, for example. And that's great because they get it. You don't have to explain yourself. And, I think that's wonderful. But the problem is that you don't talk to anybody else except people who have long COVID. So you only ever talk about long COVID. So not only is long COVID taken over every aspect of your life, you're experiencing long COVID every single minute of every single day. And the people that you're friends with all have long COVID and all talk about long COVID. So it's this kind of like, your world becomes very, very small. And I think what really helped me with the swimming was that I met a group of people locally who, it was like the Wild Swimming local group, and they were all doing it for different reasons. Like, some of them were swimming like big distances, and some of them were literally just dunking, and they were all doing it for different reasons. Some was health reasons, some was mental health reasons, some I don't even know the reason that a lot of them do it. Maybe they're doing it for exercise, for outside, for whatever. And I didn't know them before, so they weren't like, oh, that's Jackie that used to go up hills, but she can't do that anymore because she has this thing called long COVID. They weren't comparing me to me. They were just like meeting me who I was in that moment. And that just felt so lovely. I didn't have to explain the whole history of, all of that. It was, so I sort of got a little bit of social connection back, but in a way that felt kind of safe and accepting and sort of validating. And I think, one of the things that's so important, and why it's so difficult when people with something like long COVID go to a doctor, and the doctor probably doesn't really understand it, because most people don't, unless you're lucky enough to get a doctor who does have some experience in this area, or who has made the effort to look things up. And, it's difficult because they're so overworked. The chances are you're going to get someone who doesn't really understand it. And people will either say, okay, I don't really understand this, but I will look it up. Let's work together. And unfortunately, that seems to be the minority from what I've heard. Or you get a doctor who's like, oh, you're probably just anxious. And I think one of the most important things is actually to be listened to and validated, and for someone to say, please tell me, what are you experiencing, let's talk this through, let's see what we can do. So you feel validated, you feel like someone's actually listened to you, and they still might not know what to do, but they've shown an interest in you, and I think that's so important. And I actually was lucky enough to have a doctor. I went with this big long list of symptoms, and I said, I'm experiencing this and this and this. I don't really know what's going on. I tried that, didn't work. All of these things. I had, my list was massive, didn't get through it all. And the guy actually turned around and he said to me, I don't actually know. I don't know what's going on with you. And I actually turned around to him and said, thank you. Thank you for so much for actually just saying that, because so many people get the wrong diagnosis, or not listened to, or mislabeled, or gaslit, or whatever. And he actually honestly said to me, I don't really know, but let's try some stuff. And he didn't really do anything for me that was helpful in terms of giving me pills or telling me what to do, but he did make me feel like he cared and like he'd listened to me. And I think that's so important. So yeah, I think those were the three main things that I did that really helped. But I think we talk about mindset. Mindset's so important. We have to believe that things are going to get better. And that's really difficult when all the evidence often proves the opposite. But people are recovering, people are getting better, people are seeing improvement, people are getting their lives back. So we have to believe that we can as well. But I think there's so much stuff that goes on beneath the surface. And I started seeing a therapist about 18 months in, because someone told me I should. I said, I don't need that because I can talk to my partner. And they were like, no. I mean, that's not fair on him, but also it's not fair on you. So I started seeing somebody, and she was amazing because she kind of held my hand through some of those really difficult times, and she again listened, and without judgment kind of let me rip into whatever it was, or cry my eyes out, or feel hopeless, or whatever it was I was feeling in that moment. And also she was able to say some things to me that somebody who was a friend or a family member wouldn't have been able to. And there was times where I was really angry at her. And then, I actually said, I still see her now. And I said to her a few weeks ago, I said, I disagree with what you've just said, but I also know that you're going to turn out to be right, because you always are. And she thought that was hilarious, but it was true. There were so many times where she questioned something, and, I instantly sort of went on the defensive. And then once I'd kind of gone away and thought about it a bit, I thought, she might have a point. She may not be 100% right, but she might have a point. And it was starting to kind of unpack some of those patterns from childhood, some of those beliefs about needing to be constantly productive, and things like perfectionism. I'm a huge perfectionist. I'm still working on that. But I think what I realized was that if you're trying to be a perfectionist in recovery, like that's impossible, because nothing is ever going to be perfect. Your life is never going to be perfect. Stress is still going to happen. You're still going to have bad days. They're not bad days on the scale of long COVID bad days, but I still have days where I wake up and I thought, right, well, I've slept really badly, I've got a really busy day, and I'm grumpy as hell. And that's life. But it's kind of, again, it's surfing those waves, isn't it? And if someone said, is your life perfect now, I'd say, no, of course not. But it's kind of perfect for me. I don't know. I think I have a lot more of the things I need. The life that I'm living now serves me, whereas the life I was living before didn't. And that doesn't mean that I've thrown everything out that I was before. I'm still a lot of those things, but I'm those things in a healthier way, I think. And I'm just, I guess, a lot more self-aware about, when am I pushing my body a bit harder than maybe I should? Has it been a really hard week? So should I maybe have a bit more of a relaxing weekend? And just kind of understanding that, as you so perfectly put earlier, if you don't look after your body will, throw the, what is it? Baby out with the bathwater, or I can't remember what this. But it's if you don't listen to what it's telling you, then it will shout louder and louder and louder until you have to listen. And I think that was kind of what happened to me. I never listened to my body at all, whereas now I try to much. I'm not perfect, but I listen to it much better now. And if I'm stressed out, then I need to get away from the computer and do something that makes me feel a bit more chilled out, because we should probably get away from our computers more anyway, shouldn't we?
Wow, Jackie, that was a very informative and very thought out little bit of what you did. And I mean, that cold water stuff, I've heard about it, but I haven't talked to anyone that has experienced it. So I know cold water showers, I do those here and there, but I haven't gone swimming in super cold water, so I'm kind of curious now myself. But
you should totally do it. It's amazing.
I mean, I've been in the ocean, but not cold ocean, so that would be way different, I think.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in Scotland, when I started, I think, the temperature in Loch Ness, for example, gets up to about 12 or 13 degrees, maybe 14 in the summer. That's Celsius.
Everyone,
I'm sorry, I can't translate that to Fahrenheit. And in the winter, it goes down to about 5. So it does fluctuate, but not that much, because Loch Ness is massive. It's 25 miles long or something, and is it about 250 meters deep? Something like. Oh, I can't remember. It's massive and it's really deep, and there's so much water in there that I think the statistic was something like there's more water in Loch Ness than there is in all of England. Something like that. I might have just made that up. It's something like that. So Loch Ness is massive, so it doesn't fluctuate that much. Whereas some of the smaller ones will get up a lot higher in the summer because they're smaller, but they'll freeze in the winter. So, a lot of people, I started swimming when it was a bit warmer, and I think that helped because it was less of a shock. Because that's basically what you do. You go, it's a stressor. And, we talk a lot about stress up to stress down. And, you get certain types of breath work that, things like Wim Hof, for example, that are stressing you up, to kind of, it's like elastic, you stretch it and then you bring it back. And cold water is sort of a little bit like that, but, done very carefully, it can be quite safe. But, I think, with long COVID, we don't have a problem with stressing up. We're always stressed up. So I think, it's don't do something that's going to stress you up deliberately until you have those strategies in place to stress you down. And I think that's why me trying it a couple of years in really helped. Whereas if I'd tried it sooner, it probably wouldn't have worked so well, because I had no idea how to stress down. I didn't even realize that I needed to. So that I think that was why it helped me. But I think you get so many other benefits. The nervous system benefits are amazing. Cold water is good for inflammation. It's good, I think, for our metabolism. There's all the stuff about brown fat, which is, oh gosh, what is it? Brown fat has got a lot more mitochondria in it, and mitochondria are like the powerhouses of our bodies. So it's really good for that. It's really good for mental health. That being outside, being in the cold. What else is it good for? It's good for so many things. And I think, with long COVID, a lot of people have something called dysautonomia, or POTS, which is a type of dysautonomia. And a lot of people will wear things like compression to try and help with all the blood pooling and stuff. And actually, cold water well, actually any water, doesn't have to be cold. If you immerse yourself in water, it compresses you. So, I'm not suggesting that you should get into really, really hot water, because that's probably going to make people super dizzy, and I don't think that would be a good idea. But, in order to get that kind of compression, it doesn't need to be super cold. Just getting into water will help, I think. And I think it's also that you're able to maybe move in a way that is supported. If you go for a walk, you have to hold yourself up. And, that can be quite energy sort of, what's the word? It takes a lot of energy to hold yourself up. Your body is heavy. Whereas if you're in water, you're floating. So you don't have to hold yourself up. So it can be a better way maybe of doing that. Of course, being in cold water, maybe you want to go to a swimming pool and do it there instead. But yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And I still go swimming all the time now in the cold water. I'm quite excited because we're getting into winter now and things are getting cold. And, I actually swam in my favourite or second favourite. Haven't decided if it's my favourite or my second favourite loch today earlier. I was out in the snow and it was just amazing, walking over the snow, getting into the water and I don't get the lows that I did when I was ill, but I still feel, you get into the water and I just feel the stress floating off me. It's like, oh, it's been a hard week. Oh, get in the water. It just, yeah, I don't know. I think I've become a bit of a fish.
That's one way to put it. That's awesome that you found such a great way to essentially reset your body.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's a very powerful tool that a lot of people could use. But if it's a powerful tool, it needs to be used responsibly. So thank you for giving the disclaimer and everything. Because some people would probably be like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. And then, yeah, it could be dangerous. So everyone do your research, listen to the episode in full.
Yeah. And you know what? I think so much of what I've learned is that it's not so much the right things. I mean, it is the right things, but it's doing them in the right way. And, cold water, is quite intense. It can be very dangerous. People have died from getting into cold water, not understanding what they're doing. But also, as you said, it's incredibly powerful. So I think it's doing your research and understanding, doing it in a safe way, doing it in a way that works for you. And that's exactly what I see with the breath as well. There's so many different types of breath work out there. And I get people who say, oh, I've done breathing and it didn't work for me. Which to me sounds really funny because I'm like, well, breathing's kind of important. It does work for you in some way. But it's like, some people have tried certain types of breath work and they said, oh, it didn't help. And I always say, well, what did you do and who did you do it with? Did you work with someone who understands long COVID? And did you do things like breath holds? Did you try to run before you could walk? Did you focus on that functional breathing? Because if you didn't, you're probably doing too much too soon. You're putting that stressor on your body, which is actually making things worse. And it's really, it comes back to listening to our bodies, doesn't it? Does this make my body feel better? And if it doesn't, you shouldn't be doing it. Certainly in long COVID recovery. With other things, I don't know. I'm not going to get into that. But, if you are really, really, really hurting, then it's probably not good for you. Certainly in the context of long COVID, if it's not making you feel better, then it's not the right way of doing it. Doesn't mean it's the wrong thing necessarily, but you're not doing it in the right way. And, you maybe need some guidance from someone who does get it, I think, and that probably goes for all sorts of other conditions as well, not just long COVID, but that's where my experience is.
Yeah, that would be the equivalent of learning how to properly lift weights free form in the gym. If you don't do it proper, then you're going to hurt yourself, and someone else can find
Yeah,
out for you and teach you. And
exactly.
I do hate this because we are at the end of the radio episode, but the thing with that is that I like to ask everyone if they'll come back on for a second episode. And with you, you just told us your story and how everything worked up into your breathing works. So, do you think next episode we could actually go into breath works, what different kinds there are, what they're good for, and things like that? Because that would be awesome.
Totally. I could geek out about breathing for hours.
Then let's do it.
Absolutely.
But I also had one other saying that came to mind. Apparently, we like to exchange sayings. So, there's one more that I read, and I think it was on Facebook. So, don't quote it with me or anything, but it was the thing with mental health or anything that's chronic illness is that my good days are the exception. They're not the standard kind of thing. So, it's kind of like, hey, I'm having a good day, I can do things, all right, let's go. And then those are the days that are rare, so you can't hold me to that, you know. But I would love for another episode with you because I want to learn all about different kind of breath works. I want to learn about how they've worked for you in long COVID and how they could help other people with even mental health issues, because I know breath work helps out a lot of things. So
Everything. Like, I'm going to throw another quote at you now. There's a guy called James Nestor, and he's written a book called, I can never remember if it's Breath or Breathe, but like I can highly recommend it. It's amazing. But he says his quote is something like, "The missing pillar in health is the breath." And I think that's so true. You know, we talk about our nutrition and our hydration and our sleep, and they're important. I'm absolutely not denying that they're important. They are. But if you think about it, we can survive without food for 3 weeks. I'm not saying it's going to be enjoyable, but you could. Water for what, 3 days? Sleep for about 10 days, apparently. But how long can we survive without breath? 3 or 4 minutes? So, you know, I think the breath really is our kind of, you know, foundation of health. And if we're not breathing well, then our body is not running as efficiently as it should, and we're going to feel that. So, yeah, there's my breath plug.
Well, I love it. And real quick, just for yourself and the audience to know, what are your social links, or what are ways people can get in touch with you if they need to figure out about breathwork?
Yeah, so I co-founded, we call it Long COVID Breathing, longcovidbreathing.com, with somebody who I met through the podcast, actually. So we're, longcovidbreathing.com, and we're also on Instagram and YouTube and all of that, and all the links for that are actually on our website, so that's probably easiest to direct people there. And the Long COVID podcast, which was what I started when I was unwell, and kind of didn't really talk about that today, but that is longcovidpodcast.com, and you can get in touch with me through that as well. So yeah.
All right. Well, Jackie, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today, and I can't wait for the next episode. So everyone out there listening, thank you for listening on WDJY FM. And Jackie, until we see you next time, you have a wonderful day, okay?
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And Schlan. And stop.